Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this COVID legal compliance session run by Kaizen Synergy Law Firm. My name is Nihal Samara. I'm the General Counsel and Legal Director here at Kaizen Synergy Law Firm, and I'd like to welcome you all to today's session. Today's session focuses specifically on the HR compliance and COVIDSafe documentation. This is a repeat session of what we have run on Friday last week, and due to the significant interest of this particular session, we are actually repeating it for agencies that are joining us today. So I'd like to welcome all of you for joining us this morning. I will also be joined by Ruby and Lynette from the Gemba360 support desk, who will assist us to answer questions as we go through this webinar. I will add that all of the resources that I show you will be made available to all attendees this morning, and that includes the Gemba360 dashboard along with some of the core legal policy and checklist tools that we will be using. This webinar, I'm going to say, will be run in reverse, where we'll actually show you some of the resources first around it and then give you some of the legal backgrounds on what your agency needs to be aware about. And also, as we're now positioning ourselves for the vaccine rollout, what does that actually mean for you and your agency? What are some of the core information that you need to be aware about, and what are some of the core forms and checklist tools that you also need to have in place? So we're going to go through that today and walk you through those directly. As always, we'd like to pay our respects to the elders past and present upon the lands on which we all meet. While this session is being run by webinar and recorded, we do pay our respects to the traditional owners accordingly. So let's have a look at today's agenda. As I mentioned, these webinars we have been running since February last year, almost once a week. And today what we're going to be looking at is things like vaccine registers, what documentation your agency needs to keep. We're going to be answering questions like, what if a client only wants to be seen by a vaccinated staff member? What should or could be your agency position? And what HR policies should you have in place? We will also be incorporating some of the clinical governance works as well too, and these will cover things like what happens if a staff member or employee or volunteer doesn't want to be vaccinated, what happens to people's privacy, how do you manage people's privacy around this information from a personnel point of view. And also, what about things like what we're calling attestation documents, which you might have heard about if you're based in Victoria, New South Wales and Queensland as well too. And we'll be talking about those. So with it, these are some of the questions that we're going to be covered off. For those of you that are joining us for the first time, by all means, use the questions panel as well too. And we thank Karen, who had just posted a message asking about us starting as well too, and prompted us to quickly respond to everybody as well too. So thank you for doing that for us, Karen, this morning. So we are monitoring the questions panel as we go through. Now, before I wanted to cover off the legal compliance obligations generally for your agency, let's actually have a look at some of the resources that is available to you. Now, with it, what you will find, first of all, which we will send you by email, all of these links, is you can use our law firm's website. We have a list of the legal webinars on here as well too. This is obviously some of the agencies that we support, which we're very proud to do as well too, and some of whom will actually be agreed to actually use as case studies today. You will also get access to, if you don't already, your Gemba360 dashboard as well, and you can access that by simply clicking on the logging into Gemba, and it will take you to a blue button and it'll ask you for your username and password. Your username and password is quite simply, your username is going to be your email address, and we will send you a temporary password for you to log in and use, and you can change it to anything you like. And that will take you directly into this dashboard here. And I will cover some of the legal resources that you all have access to today to start using. Also with it, you can view our Gemba360 YouTube channel, which has literally all the past webinars from February that we have been running. And that includes just about every possible topic along this pandemic that we've seen as well too. So with it, once you log into the dashboard, which I just wanted to show you, the legal resources, and I will cover the legal background and theoretical parts of it after, but just to show you where things are. To start off with, you can access template policies and procedures for your COVID works, and you can access that by simply clicking on the Gemba Docs button. The Gemba Docs button will open up this tab here, and if you wanted to search, for example, on policy, you'll see a whole list of policies on here. And if you have a look at one of those, this is the work health and safety policy. You can click on that and it will come up with the pandemic and disaster works health safety policy. And this includes all of the key areas around hygiene control, workplace infection, some of which we'll talk about today, and what are the core things that you need to look at. Now, there has just been a question around, what if we're a small agency? Do we need still to have these? We recommend having these policy documents because it does cover what you generally need to know. So that essentially is within the Gemba Docs button, and you can access that by simply clicking on Gemba Docs. And if you search for policy, it'll bring up a list of policies for you to view and edit and use as well. The other part, which is what we're going to focus on today, is around the vaccine registers for your agency. Now, with this, if you click on the HR module, and again, this is a resource that is there for you to use. When you click on the HR module, what you will view is this screen here, and it is a full HR profile. Now, if I had a volunteer that I wanted to, and we'll come back to this, but just to show you how this works, I can add as many volunteers or staff into it. Now, if I created, let's say, a new, and I just wanted to list a volunteer, and I'll show you how the vaccine registers work. Quite simply, let's say I create a user called Stuart Little, and here he is here, and Stuart is an volunteer. Now, I want to have this because this way, and here it is here, I've just created Stuart. Now, what we do have for you is this. Under this tab here, being the qualifications, I can then add my COVID vaccine register. So with this, what this is used for, and we'll give you the legal background around why we're suggesting this, is that you can keep your own vaccine registers for your employees or your volunteers. It doesn't matter how big or small your agency is, it'll allow you to keep your own vaccine registers on here. So on the issue date, let's say we had it on, let's say, June the 14th, and I'm picking that date because that's when I had mine as well too. And I've been asked to, let's say, come back in 3 months' time. So what I'll do is I'll just put in June. Actually, no, I've actually been told to come back next month. So with it, I'm going to select July, and my next one is on the 14th. So with this one, and I'm just using myself as a live example, so to speak, I can then click on Save. And what you can see here is that down the bottom, it'll actually list it here. So what we do have here is, and thank you, I'll just pick up Karen's great question, which was, what are the privacy and security settings around the data entered into this database? It is secured, Karen, as well too. So what I mean by that, and let me just jump to that question here in a minute after I just show you this next part, which is actually, I wanted to actually load in the photo of my actual vaccine form. So when I get the Pfizer jab, I've actually got the form that I want that they've given me. So what I'm going to do from here is simply go to the attachment section. And what I am going to select in this case is quite simply the document that I have. And I can say, here is my vaccine card as well too. So with it, I can click on upload here. Here we go. And you can see I've just chosen a file and I simply click upload. And so what I've got here, this is just a PDF document of what I've kept. And so under Stuart Little, I've got the vaccine register date, and I've also got the attachments and the vaccine card if I ever wanted to go back and have a look at it. And I can view this as well too. And I can also edit it. You can see I've got the edit button on the right-hand side. Now, with it, it's a great question that Karen has just asked, which we will come to around this, and I'll cover some of the other legal resources in a minute. Essentially, the privacy around this is that this is a system that is secured just for your agency to use. If you, as part of the terms that you sign up and you actually use this, you are a client of our law firm around this. All the information is kept in servers based in Australia, and you can actually view our very public document. We're part of the Joint Cybersecurity Council as well too, and our servers are actually kept where the Commonwealth and state government servers are also kept as well too. With it, you can have a look at the privacy policy, which is our ICT white paper, and it actually lists quite publicly where all the information is, and also privacy controls and redundancy protocols as well too, and also based on security measures as well too. As you can see, we're actually housed where all the other Commonwealth and state government agencies are housed as well too, and you've got that surety of security and privacy in the information that you store on here. I will add that after a while, if you wish to download this information, then you can do that as well too as well. Now, going through it, with it, I will cover some of the privacy and legal questions around this. I can see that there's a lot of questions around this that we have. With it, you can also, as part of this, and we've got a few questions coming from Amanda just asking if we will cover how we should ask staff or volunteers about their vaccination status. Absolutely, Amanda. I'm coming to the legal parts of that in the session straight after this. And also, Deb has just asked, isn't individuals keeping a vaccine register breaching the Commonwealth and Privacy Acts? Again, Deb, I'll actually show you and walk you through the legal side of this as part of this process. What I wanted to show you was the resources that your agency has. What we've also put on here as well too is your ability to also add things like for people's police checks and working with children checks as well, which will allow you to also get notifications of this information as well. The other part that I will also add to this is that within this profile, and again, this is an HR record that you can keep for your staff and volunteers, you can also add discussions. And I will, picking up Amanda's point and Deb's point about vaccine registers and also gathering information about staff and whether they're choosing to have a vaccine register or not, rather than keeping that on Excel spreadsheets or hard copy files and all like information all over the place, you can also, once you've used this system, which a lot of other agencies are using this for, and we've got agencies like Women's Housing Limited that actually provide support services for domestic violence and support services to vulnerable people as well, and also Rumbalara Aboriginal Cooperative, which provides vulnerable services to vulnerable members of the community, should I say, being Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander and culture. So with it, you can also add file notes as well too and load that information in. So with this, with the services that you are delivering and questions that you might have with staff, again, you're able to keep this information on here, and you've got a single point of source of truth for actually containing this information. In terms of some of the other things that I will talk about is around assessments for agency personnel, and actually which some states like Victoria has introduced around your daily assessments. And these are called daily attestation forms. And the daily attestation forms, if you click on here, is things that I'm going to say is not really daily, even though that's what the different state departments call it, is really a form that volunteers or employees complete before delivering services to clients. And we're in this zone where you want to actually know, has anybody within your agency got symptoms of COVID, or have they been in contact or visited some of the close contact areas? So this form, and a lot of agencies are using this form, which is the COVID assessment form, and you can view it on there, which allows people to actually go in and do a self-assessment of whether they've actually had any of the COVID symptoms. And based on where your agency is, if you're based in Victoria, then you'll have a list of outbreak locations. If you're based in New South Wales or Queensland, you will have the relevant outbreak locations as well. And you can see I've just clicked on this link here. It opens up a separate tab which shows me today's information as well. So it will change based on what the relevant state departments are looking at. So these are some of the tools that you have access to, and I will come to all of the questions that you're asking. And I think I can see Karen has just asked a question around client acting as clients and our professional insurance covers for breaches and the like. So with it, Karen, just on that, as I mentioned, this system was actually designed by Gemba360, and you can Google search us and the likes. Has it been around for over 10 years now, and a lot of agencies actually use it. We've got 5,000 plus agencies just in the last 12 months. They're actually using it. We've opened this up to actually give you the resources and tools that you can actually use to access this general information around it as well too. And if you require support services, then you can certainly contact us to assist with this. It gives you really some of the core tools that you really need as part of having a single seat license to be able to access some of this core information. Going back to Amanda's question and also Deb's question, which was just wondering if we will cover how we should ask staff and volunteers about their vaccination status. I gather providing this information would be entirely voluntary for staff and volunteers. That is correct, Amanda, and we will just go through that in the next few slides as well. Deb has just asked, isn't individuals keeping a vaccine register breaching the Commonwealth and Privacy Act regardless of security measures? We're actually looking at this from a request by agencies, Deb, and I'll show you, and I'll walk you through some of the legal questions that your agency does need to cover. But these are all good, very good questions. And look, we encourage you to continue asking questions as we go through today's session. So here is the resources that you will get access to as we go through it. As I mentioned, it is our Gemba360 compliance, quality, legal compliance and quality management system. You can see some of the agencies that we've listed that have continued to use it throughout the pandemic, and we're very proud to support them around that. That said, all of the resources, including the e-learning modules, are also located here, and you've got access to templates, and we have opened up even the HR system for your agencies to keep registers off for your volunteers and staff. Now, let's jump in back to today's session around the agenda. As I mentioned, we are going to be looking at which we've covered off, vaccine registers, policies that you should have in place, and documentation to be kept. Equally, we're going to cover off some of the legal backgrounds as well too, and what issues your agencies should carefully consider. As I've mentioned, the legal compliance system covers a lot of the registers that you have, and someone has just asked, do we get copies of these slides as well too? Absolutely. We'll be sending these slides out straight after today's webinar, and Lynette and Ruby will also be in touch with you today. So essentially, let's go through, and I've just covered off what is the vaccine, what does a vaccine register look like, and how do you document this down, which we've just covered. But equally, which I will talk about, is around what are some of the documentation that you need to keep. Amanda has just raised a question about, which is a really interesting one, how should you actually ask staff about their vaccination status? If it is voluntary, what are the things that we need to consider? So we will cover those off, but also what we've suggested to agencies like yourselves is to keep this information and the conversations that you have somewhere. And it's very easy as you're going through over months and months and months as things come up. And we've seen it recently with lockdowns in Victoria. Now they're talking of specific postcode lockdowns and hotspots in New South Wales. And during this time, also we've seen changes between Pfizer and AstraZeneca, requirements, and all kinds of things are going on. So some of these conversations that you might have with staff, we do suggest you keep documentations off. And I'll come back to that. And again, in the HR space, you've got that ability to record some of these conversations against individual staff profiles as well. So let's go through. What if a client only wants to be seen by a vaccinated staff member? Now, this was actually raised by a community health service down in Victoria. Firstly, there are a number of arguments being made here. Firstly, there is the need for agencies like yourselves to ensure that staff and clients are safe from the services that you deliver. Secondly, there is a need for agencies to have a mitigation from liability of a COVID-19 outbreak in the workplace where everyone is not vaccinated. So generally, an agency can only require staff to be vaccinated if it is lawfully and reasonable to do so. And we'll cover what this looks like. So reasonableness under safe work, and we've looked through fair work guidelines and safe work guidelines as well too. Really, one of the main questions that agencies need to ask is a mandatory vaccination policy a reasonable measure for your agency to have? And we'll look at, well, what can constitute kind of a mandatory vaccination policy. This will directly affect your clients where services are being provided to, and a policy will ensure that everyone is at least aware of what your agency's position is on all of these issues outlined in this webinar. And we will add that if you have questions around this, you'll see my mobile number has been made available since February last year. It's available even on Google and searches and the likes. And also you can contact our 1300 number as well. So it is something that is out there. One of the things I will mention is that these back to basics sessions we are running weekly as well too, and it will cover different parts of the Gemba system which you can access and use. We will focus on the HR side today, specifically around the HR lifecycle and what you need to consider. Equally, the backdrop of some of the things that I'm talking about is not under just legislation only and what is under law, but also policy positions from the various state and Commonwealth departments. One of these is state requirements from the Department of Health, where certain community service organisations, it was issued back in September last year, in some health departments where what they called was a daily attestation form. And what this means is that essentially it's like a statutory declaration that requires certain community service organisations to actually have what we call like a statutory declaration for volunteers or staff members or people that are broadly providing services directly to clients to actually complete a form that essentially says we do not have any COVID symptoms and we haven't been to any hotspots, and you need to have measures in place so that if somebody answers yes to one of those, that you have measures in place to actually deal with those directly. And this is carbon copies of some of the policy positions from the State Department of Health and Human Services. This is an example of one in Victoria. So the forms and tools that I'm talking about today and will refer you to are actually tools that have actually been either provided directly as a directive under a policy position of a state or Commonwealth government or under legislation as required. Now, going back to the questions that some of you have asked already, can an employer require an employee to be vaccinated? Now, currently, there are no laws or public health orders in Australia that specifically enable employers to require your employees to be vaccinated against the coronavirus. There are, however, limited circumstances where an employer may require their employees to be vaccinated. And these factors, and this is information that is taken from the Fair Work website as well too. And we have just, which I will just add, we have actually pulled and gathered information from these legal webinar slides from Fair Work, from Safe Work, from relevant state and Commonwealth health policy papers as well too, to ensure that you get as up-to-date information as there relevantly is. So some of the relevant factors that your agency should consider is whether there is a specific law, such as a state or public health law, that requires employees to be vaccinated, whether there's an employment enterprise agreement or other employment contract. But if there is no law or agreement or employment contract that applies and requires vaccination, whether it is lawful and reasonable for your agency to give your employees a direction is done on a case-by-case basis. Now, what this means is that there are certain issues that you need to consider if you're looking to require an employee to be vaccinated as well. And we'll cover what these are. Now, the other question that comes up is, which I know Deb has asked, can an employer require an employee to provide evidence that they have been vaccinated? Now, if an employer has provided a lawful and reasonable direction to be vaccinated against the coronavirus and an employee complies with this, then an employer could actually ask the employer to provide evidence of their vaccination as well too. So what we're finding is that under even Fair Work guidelines, Fair Work is saying that even once you have require an employee to provide to have a vaccine, then you can actually ask for evidence that they have been vaccinated as well too. Now, there are privacy considerations that you also need to make, and I'll talk about what those are. Essentially, though, what is coming out of Fair Work is that where an agency wants to direct an employee to provide evidence, the agency should make sure that the requirement to provide evidence is also lawful and reasonable as well too. And this depends on the circumstance as well too. If it is unclear as to whether a direction is an employer's refusal is reasonable, then it's not a case of simply taking disciplinary action. So what it is about is having just a very clear agency position on why you're actually wanting to do this and what your reasoning around it is as well too. Now, if an employee refuses to be vaccinated, now, one of the things that we're finding is that there may well be a quite legitimate reason for not being vaccinated. So, for example, an employee may have an existing medical condition and the employer should actually consider whether there are any other options available instead of vaccination as well too. We do, as directed by Fair Work as well too. Stand downs are unlikely to be an available option for agencies simply if an employee refuses the direction to be vaccinated, and employers can only stand down employees in certain circumstances as well too. So there are specific things that your agency should be considering as part of this process as well too. Now, equally, if an employee refuses to be vaccinated, can an employer require evidence about why they've actually refused? And this is coming back to Amanda's question as well. So with it, if an employer has provided a lawful and reasonable direction to be vaccinated and an employee refuses, the employer could also ask the employee to provide evidence of the reason for their refusal. So with this, one of the things that they've said is that you can ask for a medical reason about why a vaccination cannot be undertaken by the employee, and also it is not simply a case of standing them down. This is not an option around it. It is something that you need to actually talk to the employee about. These discussions is why we're saying actually look at where you keep records of what you're actually doing around this. And you can actually log in, and when you're using the HR module, and we've got it here under Stuart Little, for example, to actually write the reasons around what and why this decision was made. And so you have this ability to actually view this information as well too, and essentially being able to have recordings of what information you may also want to see within this and what you've actually got viewed across this as well too. So with it, essentially what you can do is have a central point to keep records of what this information has and what you can have in using the service itself. Karen has just asked a question in terms of the service use for Gemba. Essentially, there are questions around the terms for service allowing use and charge of licenses and to use the content being created. This essentially, all this information, Karen, is actually owned by your agency, and terms of service allow that to happen as well too. So essentially all of the information that you place on there is actually owned by your own individual agency to actually be able to use. And that's why we've literally got over 5,000 agencies even in the last 12 months actually using it, because it just gives them a central point of source of truth for their information, especially with COVID, and equally it gives them the ability to manage all of their information in one spot as well too. So the other question that is there is essentially, can an employee refuse to attend the workplace because a co-worker isn't vaccinated against the coronavirus? Now, at present, there is no public health order preventing attendance, and it is unlikely that an employee could actually refuse to not be able to attend a workplace simply because another employee isn't actually vaccinated as well too. If an employee refuses to attend the workplace because a co-worker isn't vaccinated, their employer, which being your agency, can direct them to attend the workplace if the direction is lawful and reasonable as well too. So it is important that you be aware of these. Picking up Amanda's comment around this, we will actually show you how to essentially, I'm going to say, knit all of these requirements together, but this is some of the stuff that we would actually be having within the what I'll call vaccination policy, to be very clear of what your expectations actually are. With it, and I thank Lorraine for asking this question as well too, just in regards to what are the cybersecurity measures in place on the Gemba system. Essentially, Lorraine, you can view our IT white paper as well too, which is available on our website. We have actually made this very public, and when it is updated, essentially it covers off all of the ICT security measures that are in place, including redundancy as well too. We are based in Tier 4 data centers as part of this network, and quite simply, our system is actually mirrored, so that way there is no downtime on the Gemba system itself as well too. That said, you have complete control over who logs in to the system as well, and you can control that across the whole dashboard as well. In terms of the security, we have login details of who's logged in and when and where from what device. And like so many other agencies that actually use the Gemba dashboard as well, we have the ability to actually lock it down, which is some of our agencies here, including the WHO as well too, that actually utilize it and can actually lock it down to individual devices, Lorraine, for you to access as well too. So if you wanted to access your Gemba dashboard from, let's say, your iPhone, that can actually be locked down, so only yourself and only your agency can literally access it from that device as well. So we are able to actually lock it down literally to individual devices should you wish to do so as well too. And everything is tracked so that you can have maximum security measures in place. This is something that has been around for over 10 years. A lot of other agencies that I've just shown you have independent auditors that actually do come in from year to year as well too, and do audit those agencies. And it's to the point where even a lot of those auditors have actually recommended Gemba as a compliance and quality management system as well too. But happy to answer that at the end of the session if you like as well, and go into that in further detail. The other part that we wanted to just talk about when we look at HR and COVID laws is around how does vaccination requirements interact with anti-discrimination laws. And it is important to know that when we talk of vaccination, there are responsibilities that your agency has on even discrimination laws. So you can't discriminate against employees based on certain protected characteristics. And those protected characteristics include those that have a disability, are pregnant, or for religious beliefs as well. And so you may find that there are some staff that may have one of these protected characteristics that you need to consider as well. So when we look at vaccinations and we start to talk of mandatory vaccinations, when we start to talk of who should be really directed to provide, to have certain vaccinations in place, essentially what we've been looking at, and this is something we've worked through with a lot of agencies over the last 12 months, even before we started to have the vaccines, we knew they would come in place at some stage. And you can go back and actually have a look at some of our past webinars where we've spoken about this. Essentially, the Australian Technical Advisory Group on Immunisation has identified specific categories of vulnerable people, specifically in relation to COVID. And that includes Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, older people with underlying medical conditions, and as well as disability support care workers, aged care workers, people who work in health and certain community services settings like quarantine or meat packaging as well too. And so when you have these groups and your agency may be providing services to one or more of these, then potentially what we need to look at is, as I said at the start, how do you actually ensure that your services that you deliver are safe and effective, not only for your staff, but obviously for the clients that you're delivering services to. We've had agencies where they provide also in the past cancer support services and outreach services as well too. We've had agencies that provide food banking type services as well, outreach support services. And so when you're looking at some of these reporting requirements and register requirements, it is important that you look at, well, what position should your agency have as part of this? And obviously, it is something that I've said to many agencies, it will evolve over time, which is why we're running these legal webinars from week to week to focus on key areas. Now, having a policy is one part of it. Having registers to say, well, where do you keep that information to say, well, who is vaccinated within your agency? How do you know if you can meet your safe work obligations if you don't know some of this information? Can you make it, I'm going to say, voluntary for people or your volunteers or staff to actually provide this information to you as well too? Are there certain measures that you would put in place from a policy position to make it mandatory? What if some clients want to have people that are only vaccinated to provide services to them? So these are some of the questions, as I've mentioned before, that actually going through these slides will actually allow you to unpack some of what we are looking at as well. Just picking up Lorraine's question as well too, as you can see, even with the Gemba system, you can actually access these resources. You don't have to be sitting in front of the computer. We do send out legal updates from week to week as well too for agencies that use the platform as well too. So that way you do get up-to-date information, and especially for community service organizations that many people are on the move and don't have a specific office, you can access this directly as well too. So with it, as I mentioned, and just before we finish off today's legal session on vaccination registers and HR information, jumping into your dashboard, just to briefly run through it again, you will get a login after today's session, which will take you to this screen here as well. Your username will be your email address, and Ruby and Lynette will give you a call if they haven't already this morning, and will ask you for your password, which we will send to you by email. Once you log in, you will view this screen here. It'll have your username and password. If you do have any questions around this, you can reach out to us as well too, and more than happy to go through it with you. For now, the three main things that we'd say where the legal resources are is that you have under the HR button, obviously, the space where you can go in and add people by simply going to the Personnel Information Management button, or PIM, and you can click on Add, and you can add people in to that profile, and you can view where it is. From there, once you've got in, you can also update your own information, including your other requirements such as police checks, working with children checks, driver's license, and reminders will automatically be sent out to you. Equally, if you are looking for policy templates that you wanted to use, simply click on the Gemba Docs button, type in policy, and you'll be able to view a series of policies. And one of those is, for example, the WHS policy, and you can actually download that or read that directly as well too. Equally, you've also got attestation forms and checklists that you can also use as well too. So all of those materials are there for you to use, and the legal resources are for you to be able to access across it as well too. It is really simple to use. What we are recommending is that you actually review not only the dashboard, but also, as Amanda pointed out and Deb pointed out, looking at your policy positions for COVID safety. You've got templates that you can use that is in your legal resource as well too. You can look at also answering questions of when, how, and what people may be exempt from vaccination registers. The privacy policy in relation to keeping information we've covered off in the slides as well too. Of course, if you have any questions, you can contact our support desk directly on 1300 360 360 or email us directly at support@gemba360.com. Before we open up the phone lines and stop this recording, I will say thank you for joining us this morning. If you do have any questions, or you are listening to this recording, are you watching this recording, should I say, after today's live session, and you want access to any of the legal resources, including these slides, by all means, please contact us on 1300 360 360 or email us at support@gemba360.com. With it, we are just opening up the phone lines and more than happy